And welcome to this evening's event, From Digital to Analog and Beyond, Multimodal Scholarship, Public-Facing Work in the Digital Humanities. I'm Matthew Engelke. I'm the director of the Institute for Religion, Culture, and Public Life. It's a pleasure to be here, and I want to thank in particular Kayama for hosting us and all the team here at the Digital Humanities Center, but also IRCPL for making this event possible. We're here tonight to have a conversation between Kayama Glover and Mona Orabi. I'm going to say a few words about each of them, and then a few words about the impetus for this event, and then we can get started. So Kayama L. Glover is the Anne Whitney Olin Professor of French and Africana Studies and Faculty Director of the Barnard Digital Humanities Center. She received her BA from Harvard University and a PhD in French and Romance philology here at Columbia University. Her teaching and research interests include Francophone literature, particularly that of Haiti and the French Antilles, colonialism and post-colonialism, and sub-Saharan Francophone African cinema. She advises students in French, Africana studies, comparative literature, and human rights. She's the author of 2 books, A Regarded Self, Caribbean Womanhood and the Ethics of Disorderly Being, from Duke University Press in 2020, and Haiti Unbound, A Spiralist Challenge to the Post-Colonial Canon. That's Liverpool University Press, 2010. She has also published many articles, including in the French Review, Small Acts, Research in African Literatures, the Journal of Postcolonial Writings, and the Journal of Haitian Studies, among others, and has co-edited several works, including most recently the Haiti Reader. Professor Glover has also translated several works of fiction and nonfiction from French to English. She's an awardee of the Penheim Foundation, the National Endowment for the Arts, the National Endowment for the Humanities, the Mellon Foundation, and the New York Public Library's Cullman Center. She's the founding co-editor of Archipelagos, a journal of Caribbean digital praxis, the founding co-organizer of the Caribbean Digital, and the founding co-director of the Digital Humanities Project In the Same Boats toward an Afro-Atlantic intellectual cartography. In 2018-2019, she was a resident fellow at the Columbia Institute for Ideas and Imagination in Paris, where she began working on a new book project for the love of revolution. And she's also working on a book of essays, Blackness in French. I'm grateful to Kayama for agreeing both to host this event here at the DHC and for engaging in conversation with Mona Orabi. Mona Orabi here is an assistant professor of political science at Howard University and the editor of The Imminent Frame, a digital publication of the Social Science Research Council that advances scholarly debate on secularism, religion, and the public sphere. She received her PhD from Northwestern University. She is the author of Devotion to the Administrative State, Religion and Social Order in Egypt, forthcoming from Princeton University Press, and co-author of A Universe of Terms, Religion in Visual Metaphor with Indiana University Press. Excuse me. Professor Orabi has been a fellow or visiting scholar at the American Bar Foundation, the Institute for Critical Social Inquiry at the New School, and the Max Planck Institute for Religious and Ethnic Diversity in Göttingen, and at the Kate Hamburger Center for Advanced Study in Bonn. She also serves on the editorial boards of the Arab Law Quarterly and Middle East Law and Governance. She's a member of the steering committee of the Secularism and Secularity Unit of the American Academy of Religion and co-chair of the Law and Society Association's Collaborative Research Network on Islamic Law and Society. The impetus for this event is the publication of Mona Orabi's book, A Universe of Terms, Religion and Visual Metaphor, co-authored with Emily Flamm. As the title of tonight's event makes clear, we are very much in the realm of the multimodal. For this text in particular, first began life online and was in fact much larger or at least differently configured version of the universe with a couple dozen authors. I had the pleasure of contributing to that online forum and have more generally had the honor of working with Mona on other Imminent Frame projects and observing over the years how innovative, dynamic, and expansive her editorial vision is. It's no exaggeration to say that the Imminent Frame is the premier venue for digital engagements with secularism, religion, and the public sphere. While it's further afield from my own area of expertise, Kayama's work too on digital-born projects is equally innovative and urgent. If I might borrow from the editorial statement of Archipelagos, I think we have some fitting questions with which to begin, or at least tarry, at the intersections of Caribbean studies, religious studies, and beyond. And here is a statement from the Archipelagos editorial collective. As the Academy increasingly embraces the digital turn, we ask the following: how might we, as editors, publishers, and ourselves, Caribbeanist scholars, encourage and facilitate our colleagues' investment in the production and dissemination of the knowledge they generate? How will we go about cultivating both producers and reviewers of quality digital scholarship? And how will we help to ensure that this scholarship is recognized and rewarded by the profession? How might we encourage collaboration with, increase accessibility for, and otherwise work to narrow the gap between Caribbeanist researchers, especially those in the North Atlantic Academy, and the communities we are committed to serving? Before turning over to Mona, who will speak first about the Imminent Frame project, again, just let me extend my thanks to the staff here at the Digital Humanities Center and the Institute for Religion, Culture, and Public Life. Let me also thank our other co-sponsors. Kayama has mentioned Society of Fellows and Heyman Center for the Humanities. I also want to acknowledge the Social Science Research Council and the Department of Religion at Columbia. So with that, please join me now in welcoming first Mona Orabi.
Thank you so much, Matthew, for that very, very kind introduction. I'm so delighted to be here. I wrote down all the people I need to thank, so please bear with me. Thank you to the Barnard Digital Humanities Center and Columbia's Institute for Religion, Culture, and Public Life for organizing this event. Thank you to all the administrative staff and students for coordinating the logistics. Thank you to the Columbia Society of Fellows and the Heyman Center and Columbia's Department of Religion, as well as the SSRC for co-sponsoring the event. Thank you to Matthew and Kayama for this gift of conversation. And then finally, thank you to everyone here who's joining in person and online. I'm very, very happy to be here. Thank you so much. So to get us started, I thought I'd give a brief overview, and I'll do this as quickly as possible, of the digital project called A Universe of Terms, on which A Universe of Terms, the book, is based. So some details I'll need to leave out, but I'd be really happy to talk in further detail about anything I've glossed over during the Q&A. So the digital project, A Universe of Terms, is hosted on the platform, The Imminent Frame, which is hosted by the Religion Public Sphere program of the Social Science Research Council. And I've been editor of The Imminent Frame since 2017. In 2018, so before the pandemic, the editorial board of The Imminent Frame, after it was constituted in 2016, would meet in New York to plan content for publication on an academic year calendar. And it was during I believe it was the 2018 editorial board meeting that one of the agenda items was how to expand the audience and readership of The Imminent Frame. And this was a question that was raised in part due to funding issues. So the idea was, so we tossed around, so the editorial board meeting was comprised of me, the co-directors of the Religion Public Sphere program, and the editorial board of The Imminent Frame. And the idea was generated that perhaps we could create a digital project that would invite non-specialists into the academic study of religion, particularly undergraduate students, to explore what it is that scholars of religion are doing when they talk about religion, when they identify religion as an object of inquiry. So the project team, so Universe of Terms as a digital project, was born in that boardroom. The project team is comprised of me, my colleague at Brown University, Daniel Vaca, Zach Zinn, who was the developer on the SSRC side, and Olivia Whitener, who was at the time the editorial assistant for the Imminent Frame, and Emily Flam, who was at the time a student at Amherst College. And I also at the time was a professor at Amherst College. So I invited Emily to partner with me on the digital project to be the content designer. So the iconography that is so distinctive about the digital project was generated during conversations or through conversations between Emily and me when she was a student at the college. So all told, the digital project on the Imminent Frame is comprised of let me backtrack. All told, invitations were sent to several dozen scholars of religion, the humanities, and the social sciences. And what you see online now is a series of responses. 54 invited contributors responded to 14 terms in the academic study of religion. Each term page reflects at least 3 reflections on a term, as well as a section called From the Archive, which are essays or contributions previously published on the Imminent Frame that speak to the term in question, and a Spotify playlist that also gives readers or users of the digital project another access point into the study of religion. So how did Emily and me move from the digital project to the book project? One of the motivations for moving from digital to the book version was an exhibition of some of Emily's artwork related to the project in March 2020, which is an unforgettable month for all of us. In the span of for about 1 week before colleges and universities pivoted online, we exhibited this artwork in Frost Library, Amherst. And there was an enormously or overwhelmingly positive response to the posters that were on display. Unfortunately, the exhibition lasted just 1 month before we all were sent off, students and faculty and staff. But that sort of planted the seed in our minds that maybe there could be an afterlife or another life for this digital project. Another contributing factor, the primary one, Emily and I agree on this, was, as the COVID pandemic ravaged communities, particularly first responders, people of color, and we experience enormous loss of life globally, right? And a loss of life understood in the broadest sense, human and non-human life. 4 million acres of California forest was also lost that year. Emily and I asked ourselves, what is the purpose of scholarship in this moment? What does it mean to be a teacher? What does it mean to be a student? What is our responsibility? And we talked about these questions and we exchanged them and we truly grappled with them. By this point, the digital project it had been published in full. It was published in a staggered sense in academic year 2019 to 2020, and it was never imagined in the beginning as having a book version. That was developed as an idea between Emily and me. So again, the context here for the book is spring and summer 2020, George Floyd protests, the pandemic, universities closing, the world was on fire. So that was the context. And so the idea we had was, let's play around with this project, in part because we found that scholars of religion are among the scholars writing most insightfully about the human as both catalyst of crisis and principal agent for its mitigation. And so we played around with language, we played with image, we played with line, we played with representation, the format for the book was inspired by one of the contributions to the digital project by philosopher of religion based at Yale University, Nancy Levine. So what you see projected here is a screenshot of Nancy's contribution. Nancy was invited to respond to the term modernity. And as you can see, the contribution is comprised entirely of quotations. Having gotten to know Nancy first as an editorial member for the Imminent Frame, this was, Nancy's always thinking beyond a specific threshold, right? And she's always thinking extremely innovatively about language, about text, about visualization, about communication. So this is her contribution, and it was disorienting, but it's also very, very productive. And so we decided we would use this model as the model for our book. What we did was we visualized select contributions from the digital project, both the invited contributions and a select number of previously published contributions to the Imminent Frame generally. And we would create a narrative and an argument based on that language. So what I want to walk you through very quickly is what this selection process looks like in the context of the book. And I will show you the modernity chapter. So it will begin with, actually, I'll ask you to look at the images and the text without me orienting you to it more than what I've shared so far, and then I'll explain a few things.
Copies of the book here too, if anyone wants to hold a physical artifact in their hands and doesn't have one.
So something I'll ask you to keep in mind is the yellow arrow here is pointing to one particular quotation, which Nancy pulls from an essay published on LitHub. The yellow arrow shows where it's located in that essay. And this is the quotation by writer and educator Assia Wadood, who's actually a Brooklyn-based author. So what you'll see in the modernity chapter is you will see this quotation visualized through language, through image and text, alongside other quotations from the contribution from Nancy, but also another contributor to the modernity term. Okay, I wanted to show you a full chapter to give you a sense of the range of the illustration style in the book. Those of you here online familiar with the digital project will recognize some of the symbols first shared on the digital project. So there is some continuity between the digital project and the book version. But we expanded that iconography to better represent some of the language expressed by the authors. You'll see, or you might recognize, that the language excerpted here. So I mentioned that all of the language illustrated is taken from Nancy Levine's contribution to the digital project. Nancy Levine's contribution is comprised entirely of quotations, and the quotations that are illustrated here reflect language from Paul Gilroy, Cathy Park Hong, Toni Morrison, and the one that is the excerpt that is self-authored is the opening definition, we might say, of modernity, which was written by Jonathan Sheehan, a historian at Berkeley, who says, "Modernity is our era, for better or worse." I will just end with the last few spreads of the last chapter of the book, which is enchantment, disenchantment, to give you a sense of what we aim to argue in this book, what we hope to communicate to the reader or the viewer once they've reached this chapter of the book. And I'm very, very pleased that the author of this of the language illustrated here is in the room. Courtney Bender, Scholar of Religion at Columbia. These are among my favorite spreads in the book, and I'm so delighted that she's here with us. The idea of the book is to argue for the continual and the iterative re-examination of our language, and to suggest that the terms that orient us to the study of religion, to the study of other academic disciplines, should be revised and replenished and renewed and interrogated and thought of differently, right? And to make the argument as well that this is scholarly work, and it remains scholarly work even as scholars collaborate with thinkers and creators beyond the academy. So Courtney asked the reader, are there other ways to consider the stuff that has been marked as modernity's surpluses? And she suggests other terms. Right, so I'll end here. Thank you.
This on? Yes, okay. So what our plan is, I'm just gonna restrain myself a bit because I have so many questions about this project in particular. I'll ask as many as I can get away with. And then we'll have a more wide-ranging conversation about the digital humanities and sort of the ways in which a project like this might fit into one's professional life, one's scholarly life. And then, of course, we'll open the floor for questions from you all. And if there are no questions, I will then return to the many questions that I have and take advantage of the opportunity to ask them. So they're like the questions I should ask about process, but I'm going to start with some curiosity, like affective questions that came up for me, because first of all, your delight in the project is palpable. And that's always just the best thing about a scholarly project, when you can see that the labor that you put into it is something that you're still very proud to have done and very excited to have contributed. So maybe I could ask if you lean a little bit more into two questions. So one, the decision to do this and to invest your labor into a project like this, how it came about, your relationship with Emily Flamm to bring this into a visual space, and then maybe a little bit about why you decided as a pandemic intervention to move. A lot of us moved directly toward the digital, right? Like that was the moment where the digital turn was taken by those who had perhaps been more reticent because we needed to see each other virtually since we couldn't be physically together. There's some sort of irony that you return to the technology that is the book and to the analog. And so I'm curious if you can talk about that decision and maybe what the analog ended up offering you as a scholar and a thinker in this moment that the digital perhaps didn't. Yeah, I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you so much for those questions. The decision to invest in this project is in many ways linked to the meta issues around research and publication and scholarly expectations for tenure line scholars. And maybe I will begin there. So I felt.
Sorry, Alicia's going to be mad at me. I forgot to say we're recording, and I think about this now because we're going to have a fairly sensitive conversation in some ways about professionalism and the academy and careers. So I'm sorry I didn't say that earlier. Alicia, I'm sorry I didn't say that earlier, but just to let you all know. And I should say this with
Mic
on.
I'm getting, okay, on. We are recording, I say, 45 minutes into the event. I apologize for not making that clear earlier. So, yeah, but you knew that.
So within the context of the pandemic, particularly being at a liberal arts college at the time where small class sizes, very close contact between students and professors. I mean, the campus is the center of academic life at any liberal arts college. So the breaking of the rhythms around that life was felt very deeply by my students, was felt very deeply by my colleagues. I joked that all my books live in my home, so I was happy to share their company more, but that didn't land well with many students who were very attached, to campus life, understandably. But one of the reasons why we thought of creating this book is we, like many people, understood the pandemic not to be caused by lack of information. There was an abundance of information, right? The persistence of racial oppression persisted not for lack of information, right? The burning of California forest was due in large measure due to human judgment. So, as someone who's trained in the social scientist, who's trained to explain things, to provide information, right? It struck me that we didn't need more information, right? We maybe needed to think a little differently. So that was the general impetus. I wanted to ask different kinds of questions, and it seemed to me scholars were already doing the important work of getting us to think about our responsibility. yes, as scholars and students, but a responsibility to a world bigger than ourselves. Scholars are doing this, scholars of religion in particular are doing this, but maybe there's something about the form of the communication of scholarly knowledge that needed to be thought about differently. And that's what, on my end, motivated me to create this project. And collaborating with someone who's not credentialed as a scholar in a particular sense is also part of that, thinking differently about what we already know. There was a time when there were a couple of months, when we were playing around with the illustrations and, really reading and rereading the contributions to the digital project, where we thought about presses. And there was one possibility to move the university press route, another possibility to move, for example, to pursue this project possibly with a press that publishes graphic novels and memoirs. But it was a very deliberate decision to go with a university press because we imagine this as a scholarly project. And the hallmark of scholarship is peer review. So that's, we wanted to say, my view on this is, working with various modalities of publication is not to say, let's get rid of the university press model, let's get rid of peer-reviewed journal articles, other ways that scholars publish and communicate knowledge, but to say, actually, we can work within these formats and publish differently to advance other kinds of projects. So as to my relationship with Emily, this project couldn't have reached this point if it weren't for the relationship she and I had fostered over several years. I say in the preface, Emily was a student at Amherst College when I was a professor there, but she was never my student. She never took a class with me. I was not her advisor in any capacity. I've never given her a grade, but we kept bumping into each other on campus and in the surrounding campuses at similar events. And she sought my guidance on a project she was creating for another professor. And that really started a conversation, an ongoing conversation about the visualization of ideas, visualization to include text and image. And then the second sub-question, why the digital, what does the analog offer that the digital doesn't, especially in this moment where everyone was learning how to use the digital, right? Of course, the digital humanities people are like, we've been doing this for a long time.
Finally,
Welcome.
you're paying attention.
Yes, yes,
We've been
exactly.
here. Yeah.
Yes, we did. So Emily and I are both lovers of books. We love books, and so that's one point. But also, we did run into issues with what was possible on in the digital format, and part of this is because I don't think Dan or I or Olivia or Zach or Emily realized how massive a project this actually was. And
By this, you mean the online
Exact.
version of A Universe of Terms?
Yes, exactly. And because what we could do with the WordPress site, because we didn't have a separate team, for example, to visualize things in maybe all the ways that we imagine could be possible, right? We worked with what we could manage in a way, but there are certain the project never made possible the experience of flipping through pages, and that sensorial experience is for me part also of learning, right? Of course, the digital format there's a table of contents, you can click, you can jump, but you can't flip through pages. And I understood by creating this project how much things like artists' books and exhibition catalogs and graphic novels and memoirs help me to imagine language in a way that the speed of the digital doesn't make possible.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. I think we could have a very long conversation about that little hitch or that conundrum wherein at the end of the day, for many of us, no matter how invested we are in the digital humanities, we want to hold books, we want to touch pages, we want to put something heavy on our laps.
Right.
And I think it's part of a good way of answering why it's not an either or, right? The digital turn is not a turn away from the analog, but a different kind of relationship to knowledge and to its production.
Exactly.
So thank you for introducing that. And if anyone else is interested, I do feel like that's a conversation that should be had a lot.
Yes.
Another question that I had for you was inspired by a couple of things. The fact, like intellectuals, we love keywords. There's something, and even just seeing that page of enchantment, disenchantment with just the list, like Courtney Bender's list of alternative words, it's just so inspiring to be able to dwell in just the beauty of language and its offerings. And so I wondered if you could talk to us a bit about what ultimately, and correct me if I'm wrong, feels both in the illustrations themselves, but in the project on a meta level as collage that is about kind of offering these words as provocations and invitations, and then bringing different voices to bear on them. As you can see, those of you at home can't see, but we are super into collage here at the DHC, analog and digital, for those reasons, because of the invitation to collaborate and exchange. So if you could talk a bit about that. You have this wonderful quote on the site itself that I might botch. Yeah, no, I won't botch because I wrote it down all perfectly. All right. What if we thought differently about the one scholar equals total knowledge model? And keywords seems to fit into that frame a bit. And so, yeah, if you could just talk a bit about that. Just leave it on. It's
Okay, great. I don't know if microphones are like Zoom, where there's what is it? You're told to mute, mute yourself if you're not speaking.
I don't think we do. I think we're unlearning like basic technology because of Zoom. Just leave these on.
Okay. The keywords. So
Keywords, collage, collaboration.
yes. Okay. Collage, collaboration.
keywords.
Yes. So at the time that Emily and I first really started thinking together, I was teaching a class at Amherst called Sectarian Modernity. And that class, and most of the students who enrolled in that class had no personal connection to the Middle East, did not speak any of the regional languages, and had not traveled to the region. But like many people, are deeply interested in what's going on over there for a variety of different reasons. I taught this class called Sectarian Modernity, which gets students to think about how things called sectarian, and sectarianization relate by implication to the modernity, and modernization. And what you find, so any scholar who specializes in the life ways that each of these terms names knows how contested each of these terms is. So I think in part, the idea to create a project around key terms was, I think I'm recalling this correctly, it's an invitation to a conversation. What better way is it perhaps to teach students what scholars do but to show them what scholars do by illustrating or convening a project where scholars are debating exactly what a term means. I got this question a lot at Amherst, and I still get this question at Howard, and many educators, teachers, pedagogues here would likely agree or have similar experiences. But the question I get a lot is, what's the right answer? What is it? So there, we want to teach students to think critically, to read critically, think critically, to develop questions, right? Many students also want answers, understandably so. So a keywords project, I think, was a very good way to show that maybe the idea isn't so much to land on one correct answer, but to explore multiple possibilities for understanding a single object. And the object, as the students come to find, is not necessarily agreed upon either. That frustrates students, but I do think it shows them what scholars do. Collaboration. I will say also that one of the texts that Dan and I for the digital project thought a lot about or referenced, in our conversations is an important volume called Critical Terms for Religious Studies, published by Chicago in 1998. And a second edition of that terms volume is forthcoming. We talked a lot about, Dan and I, how those essays, as important as they are, tend to be assigned primarily in graduate level classes. And so we wanted really to create a digital project that prioritized undergraduate students and learners. And me being at a liberal arts college helped, as I was developing my sense of who I am as a teacher, that experience was helpful. And then one more thing I'll say about keywords is I do think A Universe of Terms as a book is more expansive because I would say than a typical keywords volume, in part because embedded in the project is an invitation to continue to inquire into our language. So it's not a finite project. It was always imagined as infinitely expansive, which is why we call it A Universe of Terms instead of the Universe of Terms.
Fair enough. And you just opened the door for a question that I wanted to ask you about futures of the project. First of all, do you think you could have done the book had you not done the site prior to doing the book? And then secondly, speaking of second editions of the 1998 book, will you do or would you do another iteration of this project? And would it extract from the work that's already currently on the website, or would you put out a new call and invite new voices into it?
Thank you so much for asking that question. The first one, could we have done the book without the digital project? Absolutely not. This book is collaborative in every sense of the word, and we acknowledge that in the acknowledgements that this book would not have been possible without the Religion Public Sphere program at the SSRC, which supports my editorship, would not have been possible without the contributors to the digital project, would not have been possible without Dan and without Olivia. It would not have been possible without all of the layers of authorship that are embedded in the digital project. So I do not think this book could have been created without the digital A Universe of Terms. There are, as the bibliography notes, examples of scholars illustrating scholarly knowledge, and they are part of the inspiration for the book. So Unflattening is one, and there's another one we reference called Logicomics, which the history of mathematics, right? And there are also other examples in philosophy that were recently published by Princeton. I'm trying to think of your other question, the future of the digital project.
Both, really. Like,
Okay.
would you do this whole thing over again? And if so, relying on the existing digital project, or would it be a brand new call for more contributions? Sorry.
Would it be a brand new call for more contributions to the site and then another volume? Or would you
Yeah.
go back to what you've got and say, all right, let's reshuffle and see what else can emerge from the existing knowledge that we first generated?
Yes. So, this is such a helpful question to be asked. So, what I learned in the experience of editing the digital project is that this was such an enormous undertaking that we needed separate funding for it. Or like a future version, like a future iteration. So at the time that I was editing the digital project, I was teaching my regular 2-2 load at Amherst. I was advising thesis students. I was doing my regular editorial work for The Imminent Frame. It was a lot. And it was such a massive undertaking that it sort of really got me started thinking about, so who are the funders? So in our foundation ecology, right, that support this kind of work. So I started applying for funding, and I'm very pleased to share that the Henry Luce Foundation is supporting the next digital iteration of the project, and is supporting it as a collaboration between me and colleagues at Johns Hopkins. So Navida Khan is a co-PI in the project. Lisa Sedaris, who's a current editorial board member of The Imminent Frame, was a contributor to the digital project, was one of the series editors of the IU Press book. She's based at UCSB. And Catherine Gerbner, who is at the University of Minnesota. So we propose the next digital iteration to be a collaboration between 4 universities, and there will be a next digital project. The main difference between the first digital project and this next iteration is that we are actually going to excerpt and feature terms that emerge from our research sites and do not privilege Western epistemologies, which this book does. In part because these epistemologies, they are part of our language, and it's important to engage with them. And I think it's possible to do so in interesting, productive, and creative ways. We wondered, though, what would it look like to create another related project where the religious lives of enslaved people in the Dutch Caribbean, what if terms are drawn from their religious life ways? You know, how can we think differently about religion and the human if those terms are centered in our lexicon? And as for another book, we will see. Yes.
Can I put you on the spot and ask if you can just give one example of a term that wouldn't have potentially fit in this volume, but that you can imagine being part of a future volume or future digital site volume, perhaps?
So maybe I will preview Catherine Gerbner's contribution. The term that she will be focusing on, and she's relying on a variety of textual sources. I will call this individual sort of the protagonist of her project. So her life in the Caribbean is captured in a variety of different letters. And the term is Adgatome, which is a reference to Africa.
Thank you. We were supposed to continue our conversation, but I think maybe in the interest just of breaking things up a little bit, I'm going to open the floor to you all if you have some questions or comments or thoughts or experiences you want to share. And then, as I threatened, if you don't, I will keep asking questions, but I would invite you to speak up. And those of you at home, I think we've got a setup whereby you can ask your questions or make interventions as well. The awkward silence before Q&A. I should have warned you that I was going to switch the timing up.
I have a question.
By all means.
Thank you so much for that, Mona and Kayama. And I have a question for Mona, but then maybe also for Kayama. How I know that, while you were working on this book, you were working on a more, let's call it orthodox book. And I wonder how those experiences meshed or didn't. So I wonder if you can speak to that. And kind of to kind of bring you in and also to kind of bring in some of the questions that that you posed in the editorial statement for your digital journal about it kind of pulls in some of the issues that you were asking Mona about to start with, which is the speaking of orthodox, the kind of the legitimacy of certain kinds of platforms and the recognition, and maybe from your perspective, could you speak to ways in which your involvement in Archipelagos or other online digital platforms have or have not gained that recognition, and maybe the work that you and your colleagues do to make sure that it gets acknowledged as a legitimate and important form of scholarship and public outreach?
Thank you for that question. Yeah, so I went through the peer review process for A Universe of Terms and my forthcoming book with Princeton at the same time. And they were very different experiences. Well, there are certain commonalities. You submit a manuscript, you wait for the reader reports, you decide based on the reader reports what needs to be changed. But I did feel I could do the Universe of Terms project precisely because I was making strides toward the solo authored monograph with a terrific press. I would not have pursued A Universe of Terms book in the same timeline or the same time frame if I wasn't advancing with the solo authored monograph. It was very important to me that by the time I went up for a third year review, that both manuscripts were submitted to presses, which is what happened. So I could say, well, I have a manuscript under review with Princeton. I have another one with IU, and yes, the one with IU is very non-traditional, but still scholarly. And this demonstrates the breadth of my interest as a scholar.
Yeah, thank you for kind of reiterating one of the central questions I think that comes up. First of all, let me just say I don't know if this is a word, but marveled at the amount of work that you have done in order to realize this project alone, much less also a single authored monograph. Just for those of you who have done edited volumes, you'll know that herding cats and wrangling goats, which is really what it takes to put together something like this, in addition to liaising with the press and keeping in mind the core tenets of the project, et cetera, is an immense amount of labor that ironically does not get at all the same level of recognition and appreciation as does the single author monograph, which also takes its own kind of immense investment in labor. So just to really just say how impressive that is and how remarkable it is. And I appreciate, it goes without saying almost, but I did want to say it. And to acknowledge some sort of irony that I think in response to your question, that currently seems to be at work. I'm now an older person in the profession, a senior scholar. So I didn't have to be as brave in doing a lot of the work that I'm doing now. I turned to sort of the non-traditional things that I do, like translation and digital humanities, after tenure. And what I tell junior colleagues and what I tell graduate students at this point, and Mona and I spoke a little bit about it, Matthew and I have talked about it a little bit as well, is can be summarized, I think, with the phrase "at your own risk," still, unfortunately, because we're still in a transitional moment. And ironically, what I'm finding as I write letters of recommendation for students and junior colleagues, for fellowships and for positions, ironically, one of the frustrating effects of this digital turn is that there's a bind that didn't exist before, which is because the digital cannot be discounted at this point, what you'd often have is in a pool, because we've got this kind of scarcity of positions, right, and a superabundance of talented and qualified scholars, you have folks that not only have to be excellent and publishing with terrific presses and excelling in all the traditional levels, but there's sort of an implicit idea that, well, are you also familiar with digital tools and technologies? Do you also have these sort of side projects that you're doing? So it's not something that is independently rewarded and recognized as yet, but it's creeping into expectations of potential employers and those who are looking at so I'm finding when I'm looking, on search committees, like these extraordinarily busy, more so than they would have had to been 10, 15 years ago, 5, 10 years ago even, because of our increasing interest in the digital. Whereas what the goal would be, and I think what the work of folks like editors at the Imminent Frame are doing, what we're trying to do at Archipelagos is is create metrics for evaluation and appreciation of the true rich and deep scholarship that goes into digital humanities work, such that that can be more and more legible, on par with, and not as an increasingly necessary side hustle to traditional or orthodox scholarly work. And so, like in Archipelagos, you mentioned peer review, the journal that I co-founded and co-edit. One section of that journal is transparent, single blind peer review of digital projects. This is something that the Modern Language Association has started doing as well, which is saying out loud, what are the metrics for evaluation of digital scholarship? So that we can come to some sort of consensus that when these projects are on someone's CV and are being passed around the table of those who decide whether or not someone is going to pass their third review or get that position, that we're speaking a similar language of evaluation. And it's not, we don't have kind of old guard in the room that can say, what is that? Well, we can tell you what it is. We can tell you why it's valuable. We can speak comparatively about its worth and its contribution. But I think we're still very much in a frustrating transitional period that I feel very grateful, frankly, to be on the other side of. And I appreciate the amount of work, again, that you have had to do to be able to attach labor and value to this at the same time that you're still doing the hard work of capitulating in some ways or acknowledging the need to do traditional scholarship.
Thank you for that. I do actually have a question for you about Archipelagos. I've been a longtime admirer of this journal and of your work, and it's such a privilege to be in conversation with you today. So this question I have about Archipelagos is, you publish in multiple languages, which should seem standard in any academic forum or format, but it isn't. So I wonder if you could speak a little bit about the decision to sustain a multilingual platform and what that means for the metrics of evaluation that you generate.
Yeah, that's, I feel like the answer to so many of these questions is the jury is out on how, on whether or not we're going to be able to be successful in what ultimately are experiments, and that have a lot to do, as you said, with funding and resources. There's only one of the most expensive things about being in the global South and working as a Caribbeanist regionally in places whose nation languages have been determined by the vicissitudes of colonialism, mean that, we have the expense of translation. If we're really going to talk to one another, we're at once limited by the fact that we belong to French departments, Spanish departments, English departments, etc., but that we're trying to speak to one another in lingua francas, right? And that lingua franca is English. So here we find ourselves capitulating to the very sort of thing that we're trying to push against, but by necessity so that we can communicate. So I don't, if we can appreciate like the negative feedback loop that represents. And so what we've tried to do with Archipelagos is say, all right, screw it. We do not have the money to translate every article that comes in. But what we can do is take baby steps in that direction. And so what those baby steps are is that we can commit to, either from the kindness of collaborators, friends, and some strangers, translating all of our abstracts into English and producing them bilingually in their original language and then in English, and then keeping the original texts in their original language. The dream hope of the experiment being that we can build an audience sufficient to convince some funders or more kind, generous strangers to volunteer to translate. It happens, believe it or not, few and far between. It's not something we can promise at this point, but it's something we at least were able to build into the back end of our website, such that you can click on a button and see the infrastructure, all the instructions, all the menu items, and all the abstracts in Spanish, French, English, and soon also Haitian Creole. But it's just so much of the digital, I think you're aware as well, is just an open call for help from the world. This is what we're trying to build. Will you come? And sometimes that call gets answered and in really great ways. And sometimes it does seem to be like a tree falling in the woods, but you just keep trying for as long as your resources, human and capital, last.
Thank you for that.
Do we have any other questions from out there in the wilds of the interwebs or here in the room? Yeah, please. We're going to give you a mic so that you can be heard.
So I'm Mark Larimore from the New School, and had the pleasure of Mona and Emily's coming to speak to my undergraduate lecture course 2 weeks ago in a classroom full of design students. And so in some way, I think we were the target audience, or one of the target audiences of the book. And it's got me thinking in a different way about the way in which the project of The Universe of Terms, the book, might open new frontiers for thinking about what scholarship is and new questions about how it can be assessed and valued. Because in response to your question about what another version of this might be, I imagined, and you won't do this, what would happen if a different artist worked with the same archive? And in a way that seems consistent with the sort of pluralizing invitation, the conversation of the whole thing. But I've told you what I'm going to try and do in a course in the fall is start our course on the theory of religion with this book and ask students at every point as we engage text to also try to think visually. So quick question about what the review process was like for the visual part of this project, and then any thoughts from either of you about the frontier this opens for multimodal scholarship that, whether online or in analog form, goes beyond the textual. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Mark. It's great to see you. You're absolutely right that any other pair of thinkers, observers, scholars, creators would create a different book, and that would be terrific. There's a way that, again, with my training in the social sciences, and other disciplines maybe have a similar orientation that, and maybe this goes back to what Kayama extracted from the preface, thinking about how expertise is communicated in the academy. And what was so exciting to me about this project was I got to say, I'm not giving you a definition of religion. You perhaps can develop one by engaging with this project, but it's not necessary for me as a co-creator to provide you with the definition to engage with this project. So I felt liberated from the expectation to explain, to clarify, to distill, to argue in traditional ways by inviting the viewer and the reader to look around, flip through the pages and perhaps create other interpretations, maybe argue with what we represented. That's great too. And you're absolutely right that another artist would see something else in the text. I'm sure that that's the case. And maybe Kayama can speak to what this opens up for multimodal scholarship.
I mean, you already, when you were speaking, Mark, I really appreciate your question. In my head, I had the phrase run through, how can we be the change we want to see in the world? Only because it made me realize, well, one of the things that I know, and Ellie, I might put you on the spot, but you can say, no, don't, because I was going to ask you to maybe say a couple of words about, what we try to do here at the Digital Humanities Center. Or one of the things that we do is we support pedagogy and different modes of pedagogy, and help professors here in our community offer students different metrics for their evaluation inside the class. So here we are talking about tenure and promotion and fellowships and what have you, but it does kind of start in the classroom. We're all conditioned, like you assign a paper at the midterm and a paper at the end of the semester, but there are many ways that we can gesture toward exactly this kind of work already with our students and in our position as authorities in the classroom. We can say, yes, the 5 to 7 page paper is a mode and it's great and we can evaluate that. But what are some creative ways that you can engage with the material and the content of this course that don't necessarily turn into essays? Would you be willing to say a little bit about the kind of things we do to support students and maybe I'll just add that the journal itself also, so Archipelagos, in terms of what we want to think of as this beautiful experiment, the reason we also did that was not just to have metrics of evaluation for digital projects, but also to give scholars opportunities to indulge their creativity with articles, like standard scholarly articles, but that live their best lives online, because the content is enhanced through a quick listen to something, or to something visual that's interactive, or to video. And so in these small ways, taking, again, these baby steps towards, well, what if we thought about knowledge and its production and its reception differently? Like, we can just do that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think
Ellie is the graduate assistant here at the Digital Humanities Center. So to know that.
So I think one of the things that we do really well here when it comes to bringing out, I think we inspire a lot of creativity that the students already have. And so a lot of the stuff we do, we'll work with archives and we'll do things like collage and stuff. And it's a way of looking at history or looking at whatever content students are learning, but then shifting the way that you think about it and thinking through a different way, not only of visualizing it, but it shifts your understanding. When you're in the archives and you're taking that work and you're copying, pasting, and you're looking at it in different ways and you're shifting the medium of it, you unlock a different understanding and it opens your eyes in a different way. And I think that that's something that the Digital Humanities Center really brings out in scholarship and in knowledge. And I think it really shifts the way in which we're producing knowledge, but also there's this interesting interface that happens between the digital and the non-digital and the new ways of thinking that it unlocks. And I think it's almost hard to verbalize it. But I don't know, it's really interesting. It's imaginative and it's really creative. And I think it really makes you think to yourself, oh, okay, yeah, we have to write papers, but what else can we do? how can we, maybe we're writing a paper, but what kinds of visual media or animation or whatever it is, how can we use that to actually make the audience see what we're doing in a different way and come to a new understanding?
And literally, we encourage professors to, instead of or in addition to written projects, things like Scalar or Twine, or we support story maps or Timeline.js. And just as Ellie was saying, it's the same information, but just as Imminent Frame does, coming at it from a different perspective that actually changes the way you know and the way you articulate what you know. If we can do that in the classroom, I dream a world where we can also do that as scholars and colleagues.
Absolutely. And I realized, so related to this point, I forgot to speak to Mark's question about the review process, which is it was super interesting. So the preface that ended up being published in the book is not the preface that was submitted for review initially, in part because, and I'm so grateful for this feedback from one of the reviewers who waived anonymity. It's Sally Plommy, scholar of many things, including religion and art at Yale. I had included some language in the initial submission about how the visual might provide greater ease of access to scholarly ideas and to scholarly language. And I'm grateful that she pushed back on that suggestion because the aim here is actually not to create, I don't think it's quite right to say that the visual in this sense is more accessible to people, right? But it offers a different access point, right?
It's not an easy read.
Exactly.
By any means, just
That's
because
right.
it's visual.
Yes. So I was really grateful for the extent to which the reviewers for IU Press deeply engaged with both the scholarly and the pedagogical catalyst for the digital project and for the book.
Please, yeah.
I am Alessandra, and I'm the kind of
With your mask, good to see you.
I'm the kind of teacher that Akayama quoted as the one that everyone looks at her and thinks, but you are able to do that, isn't you? But I've never done, and then my way of transmitting and doing pedagogy is a practical and narrative. But anyway, I really want to make my congratulations, because your book is beautiful. I wouldn't expect that.
Thank you.
And normally, when someone speaks about digital humanities, I think there's big graphic that appears in newspapers and divulgation science, which leave me a little afraid of not understanding, because of course image. I think about the canonic way in which religion, for example, for centuries was explained to illiterate was through images. Then all the relationships between art and liturgy are figural, and we cannot say that they are more objective than a narration. On the contrary, and you show beautifully in the images, in these images, it is not quite neutral. The colors, the images, all this camp is a very disputational camp. It's the symbolic through the images. Then my question is a little bit like, I want to understand why, or if it's true that when we speak about research creation or this kind of research in humanities, sometimes this graphic system is considered more scientific as a criterion of transmission than the narration. I don't know if it's not really your.
Wait, so you're saying that the graphic is seen as more scientific or more objective in a way than the writing?
I think that, well, for example, I'm Italian. In Italy, actually, all the scientific divulgation is obligatory, is mandatory through graphic and big things, which are very difficult to understand. But anyway, of course, the idea is that they are more objective, I think. That's why they are so much used, but maybe it's not like that.
Because they're like representational in a way.
So actually, maybe I'll take the second comment and think with it a bit out loud. As I was applying for funding to expand the digital iteration, I browsed through a number of digital projects, and one of the ones I came across that really that continues to stick as an influence is that one hosted by MIT, and it's a digital project that visualizes climate science by faculty there, and it is graphic in the sense that you might imagine, as in it contains a visual element that is image based, but it's not graphs and it's not maps. It is, again, expands the genre of graphic representation for the sciences. It is aesthetically beautiful, which you can, I will have to recall the name of the project. I don't know about the evaluation aspect of the question. I wonder if this might vary by different fields. But the second point, which was your first one about what you said is art and liturgy, you might find it interesting. So, and you flipped through the spread that you showed, Spirit. So pages 14 and 15 was actually inspired by a conversation I had with a monk in Egypt, one of the oldest monasteries in the Sinai, and he was cracking jokes. So he asked me. So the spread says, and this is language derived from Josef Sorit's contribution to the digital project, who's a scholar of religion based in the Department of Religion here at Columbia. It goes, what happens when spirit is tethered to an adjective, a racial modifier, for instance? Does making spirit black help to clarify things? So in this conversation at the monastery, the monk asked me, what makes oil boil? And I thought, I don't know, heat, temperature. And he said, a little bee. So it's sort of, we pulled from all of these references. I cannot reference this story in a bibliography, right? But when we read and reread the contributions to the digital project many times, and when we came across this question, this set of questions, and many of the language excerpted in the book, it's either a question or it includes a first person, the second person, so it implicates us in the question. We thought of all sorts of memories, right, that help us to think about the representation of language. And this is how we got to this spread.
Thank you for the question. If there aren't any additional questions, either in the space or online, I think I will wrap things up by saying thank you. Thank you for this volume in the world, and thank you for sharing all the information you did about its conception here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you all for being here, for your questions and your engagement. Thank you for being out there. And we hope to see you again in our space. Thanks.
Bye.